What is going on, hybrid shooters? It's Jason Vong, and the hype for these Sigma lenses is real. These are incredible lenses. Any Canon or Nikon shooters who've been using the Sigma art lenses on their system have nothing but praises for them. And just before this year, if you wanted to use any of these lenses on a Sony, you would have needed an adapter. However, with the adapter, you would be losing out on a lot of the native performances. But now that Sigma is slowly releasing the current art line for Sony Alpha, we no longer need to adapt. The performance should be a lot better. So in this video, we have the Sigma Art 35, 50, 85, 1.4 lenses, and we're going to be doing a comparison between sharpness, autofocus performance, and form factor against the Sony Zeiss lenses. We took these lenses out to Anime Expo, the largest Japanese pop culture convention in the United States, a perfect place to grab a lot of portraits of people's cosplays. And our lighting setup for these cosplay portraits, we're using two Godox 8200 with the twin head and a 38-inch Parapop glow modifier. This is a really solid setup for mobile lighting since we're running around the show floor doing portraits. Now, right before we jump into the sharpness comparison, I do want to say that this is by no means a scientific test. We are only using what was sent to us and giving you our user experience on it. Other than matching up the brightness, I did not alter the sharpness of any of the images in any way, and we did our best to shoot at the same settings as much as possible. Now, right off the bat, all of the images between the two sets of lenses look incredible. However, when you punch in, Sigma looks to be a tad bit sharper consistently at 1.4, especially when you look at their eyes and their eyelashes. It seems that the Sigma is sharper over the Zeiss. Not to say the Zeiss isn't sharp at all. Now, we tested this on two different a7R3s. We have two different people shooting. We traded lenses, we traded camera bodies, and in every situation, the Sigma art came out a little bit sharper. And what's interesting is that a week before we went to Anime Expo, Danny did his test comparing all of the 50mm for the Sony Alpha cameras, and he said the Zeiss 50mm is sharper over the Sigma art. If you're interested in seeing his comparison video, I'll have it linked up here. Now, is this a big deal? Probably only to pixel peepers. The general people who will see these photos will not be able to see the difference unless you force them to pixel peep. Otherwise, both versions of the images look fantastic. Next, let's move on to autofocus in photo mode. Now, we're both using autofocus continuous on our cameras, and both sets of lenses grab focus extremely quickly. Though I will say the Zeiss and Sony lenses are slightly a hair faster, but it's almost indistinguishable. However, in terms of reliability, the Zeiss and Sony is definitely a lot better. Sigma, especially the 35mm, did choke up once in a while. It did not react when I was trying to grab focus on something. I don't recall having this hiccup with the 50mm or the 85mm, but the Sigma 35mm for sure. Now, I haven't done a proper wedding or event style coverage with the Sigma lenses yet where the subjects are in constant motion, so I can't say how reliable they are in those situations, but for casual photography, for portrait photography, the autofocus is great. Next up, let's move on to video autofocus because I know a lot of people are curious about using these lenses for gimbal work or talking head style interviews. Now, before we get into that, I just want to say the 1.8 lenses are going to be a lot faster and much more reliable in terms of autofocus. So with that said, the Zeiss and Sony lenses are faster, but by a hair. The significant difference though is that they do a much better job tracking and keeping focus on your subject. Let's start off with the 35mm first. Again, it's the Sigma art lens that has a slight issue keeping up for some reason. It's a lot slower at grabbing focus compared to the Zeiss 35mm 1.4. When comparing to 50mm, the Sigma 50 actually did a pretty good job at grabbing focus. But again, it's the Zeiss and Sony lens that did a better job at keeping focus on the subject. Moving on to the 85, what's hilarious about this is that the Sigma Art 85 was so heavy that it lowered the setup. You'll see here in the video that I have no headroom whatsoever when you compare it to the G Master 85. Anyways, what's interesting about the 85 comparison was that the Sigma Art 85 did a better job at grabbing focus than the G Master, but once the G Master warmed up though, the difference is almost indistinguishable. Again, autofocus tracking on the 50mm and the 85mm were pretty close, but the Sony lenses do a slightly better job, especially when the subject gets extremely close. And what I also noticed was that the Zeiss and Sony lenses do a much smoother focusing compared to the Sigma Art. The Sigma Art stutters a little bit before achieving focus. In terms of autofocusing noise, I did not really test for that. I didn't really hold the lenses up to my ear, but the fact that I never noticed it is a good thing. With the Sigma lenses for the Canon EF mount, I do notice the noise right away. Now, I'm not saying the Sigma lenses are terrible for videos, it's quite the opposite in fact. The Sigma lenses have better manual focus control. The Zeiss and Sony lenses uses fly-by-wire focus, making it a little difficult when you're trying to manual focus, but the Sigma lenses allows for finer control when you're manual focusing. So if you like to manual focus when you are shooting videos, the Sigma might actually be the better choice. Let's move on to the form factor. The Zeiss and Sony lenses are all lighter and smaller, especially the 85. Now the Sigmas are longer because the barrel is designed to fit the FE mount. It's a little bit longer compared to the Canon and Nikon counterparts. Now some people were concerned Sigma just stuck an MC11 adapter into the lens and were disappointed that it's not completely redesigned for mirrorless cameras. Like for example, making it smaller, but it's kind of hard to make a f1.4 lens smaller. But if you saw these lenses and held it in person, it's really not that bad. It's very comparable to the Zeiss. I would say it's a little bit heavier. Though I cannot comment if the performance is better over using EF lenses and the MC11 adapter, just from shooting with these lenses, they seem very solid. Other physical differences that may be minor to a lot of people, the Zeiss and Sony lens have an aperture ring and you have an option to toggle it to be clickless, which allows for a smoother change in aperture, especially when you're doing videos. Both sets of lenses have an autofocus and manual focus toggle, and again the Sigma lenses will have better manual focus control over the Zeiss lenses. Now it's hard for me to say anything conclusive about the Sigma Art lenses, but from the 5 days that I was shooting with them, I'm gonna say this. If you are a casual photographer or a portrait photographer, go with the Sigma. These lenses are great bangs for your buck, especially for the quality. However, if having solid autofocus is crucial to you, especially if you are an event shooter, hybrid shooter, or video shooter, go for the Zeiss and Sony lenses. You definitely want that autofocus reliability when it comes to anything fast-paced. In the coming weeks, I'll have videos focusing on the individual Sigma lenses. If they're out already, you can click right here. If not, check out my video on the Tamron 28-75. Guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.